Hello everyone, and welcome to the first of our three um, sessions this July. Our first webinar is on the power of the powerless. What does it take for us to actually make substantive change in society? For those who don't know me, and I usually just launch in and start talking. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sharif Abdullah. I am the director and founder of Commonwealth Institute. I've written a bunch of books that we'll be talking about tonight. And I'll be going through relatively rapidly a lot of information that we'll be talking about more in the near future. Again, as we're doing this webinar style tonight, I'm asking everyone to turn off their video and turn off their audio. And we will be doing some Q&A at the end of the hour. Without further ado, let me share my screen with you. And let's talk about the context and perspective in which we're talking about the power of the powerless. I want to set part of that context being my book, The Power of One, Authentic Leadership in Turbulent Times. I do want to say parenthetically that after 30 years of this book being in print, a year or so ago, the publisher and I, the publisher is New Society Press, we decided that 30 years had gotten kind of creaky, so we're revising it now. I'm hoping in the next year or so, I'm going to have a revised copy coming out. But I still got 60 copies of this left, and it still has power in it. And so I want to start by reading to you from the introduction to The Power of One, Authentic Leadership in Turbulent Times. The time has come for a new understanding of power and leadership. The old ways simply don't work anymore. The old explanations don't explain anything. Our current system is no longer adequate for our needs. Our society has gotten far too complex for any one person to understand. We act, having no idea why we act. We fumble around looking for direction as we head closer to the chasm. In a time of chaos, we see all of the dangers and none of the opportunities. We drift, bickering, fighting, arguing about who is to blame for the present morass. All of us must share the blame. We fail because deep down inside, we don't feel the problem even has a solution. We propose alternatives as a gesture, out of guilt, with the deep belief that nothing will change for our efforts. We continue to place implicit faith and trust in institutions which constantly fail us. We do this because the alternative is to admit our own failures. This simply must stop. The times call for a revolution in consciousness. That is the purpose of this book. And it's also the purpose of us being together tonight. A revolution in consciousness, a revolution in how we see ourselves, how we see each other, and how we interact with ourselves, each other, and with nature to the good of all, for the best of all. And that's what we'll be covering tonight. Part of our context is looking at things from the point of view of our 12 global challenges. These are the 12 areas that are pressing every single human being on this planet right now. while I said that this was talking about things from the context of the George Floyd killing, what we're looking at is how all of this fits together and how all of this is one problem. It's not a matter that we have these solutions over here and those solutions over there. Once we recognize that this is all one problem, we can then approach it from a perspective that gives us a connection to that one problem. Many of you have seen this chart of 50 symptoms of our problem. This is out of my book, Creating a World That Works for All. I think it's on page 30. And this is just a generalized rundown of all of the things that are pressing us back 20 years ago, which happen to still be pressing us right now. These are all of the things that are pulling us toward a new society and having a vision for a new society. Now, in terms of the George Floyd killing and its aftermath, the aftermath of action around that, we know that there's several different places where the mess interacts. We can look at this from the point of view of racism, of urban deterioration, of ethnic unrest and conflict, of social and political alienation, and maybe even more of these aspects. The thing that for us to remember is that as important an issue as racism is, as important an issue as ethnic unrest and conflict is, we have to see this in the totality of all of our challenges, because all of them are pointing us in one direction. And that one direction is a world that actually works for all beings. So I want to look at this issue of of the power of the powerless, but I want to look at it from a global perspective. I want to look at it from the perspective of how do people all around the world face this situation? There are many people in America that say the situation in terms of African Americans in the context of the United States is unique. Well, number one, it is. Number two, it isn't. Okay. Number one, it is. This is the only society where this history has come together in this way. But on the other side, other societies face their own unique histories. And all of us have to find a way through this in such a way that we are not amplifying the problem by over-analyzing it and analyzing it out of context. We have to be able to create and hold the context for the problem. In terms of looking at the power of the powerless, I focus on all of my lineage, and what I call my lineage are the people who have been holding nonviolent positive visions for transformation and been doing that for a few hundred years. This includes Mahatma Gandhi. This includes Martin Luther King. This includes Václav Havel. This includes Nelson Mandela. But I'm going to be spending a particular time looking tonight at the Velvet Revolution of Václav Havel. That's Havel talking to roughly 1 million people jammed into Wenceslas Square at the height of the Velvet Revolution. And I'm focusing on him because they had a revolution. They actually changed the nature of their society and managed to defeat the second largest superpower on earth at that time, and did it without firing a single shot, did it without any anger, did it without burning down a single building. So this is a very powerful context in which we can be, this is a powerful lens from which we can start looking at our own society and what our society can change to and what our society can look like. Havel has been an influence on me for quite a while. He became very popular after the Velvet Revolution, where he became the president of the Czech Republic. But well before that, he was an influence on me. And yeah, so this picture of us together with Mrs. Havel, he was alive and I had hair. So that tells you how old this picture is. But I started reading Havel when he was still a prisoner in a Soviet prison. And I had the honor to meet him on several occasions. This was the first time in Forum 2000, and he actually invited me back to Prague to work in another matter. And so my work is deeply influenced by him and by all of the others that have led the people power revolutions. Okay. So around the world, people have been rising up to challenge their authority, the challenge of the authorities, and to make profound changes in their governments, because the governments needed to be changed. In Ukraine, they called it the Orange Revolution, and I had a friend who was in the middle of the Orange Revolution, was on the streets for 6 weeks, publicly, boisterously, non-violently, positively reaching for change. Millions of people came out and overthrew their government. They were on the streets day and night for weeks. And he was sending me emails from this, talking about how non-violent the crowd was, how actually happy and positive the crowd was. He was saying, you know, this is the largest group of Ukrainians that you could find that weren't drinking. He said, nobody's out here getting drunk. And they all managed to feed themselves. They all managed, when somebody had extra blankets, they managed to distribute the blankets to somebody who needed it. It was a very peaceful and positive operation. All different walks of life came together, rich and poor, the young and the old. In Lebanon, they called it the Cedar Revolution, because the cedar tree that was on the Lebanese flag was a symbol of freedom for them. So they were able to take the national symbols and recontextualize them into their revolution. In the face of crowds like this that are out on the streets on a permanent basis, governments and militaries are helpless in the face of a massive outpouring of people. Where do you start shooting? Where do you start arresting? Especially when people are nonviolent, and especially when people are positive and are recognizing that the police are not against them, that the thing that they're opposing is something other than the police. And I'll get to that in a minute. So this is again in Lebanon. So there's no front to the crowd. There's no back to the crowd. Nobody's called this out, called for people to do this. This is an action that comes from the will of the people themselves when they're united with a single purpose. And we'll get to that in about 10 minutes. In Georgia, they called it the Rose Revolution. People were, instead of fighting the police, they were trying to get the support of the police. And I find it really interesting here in the United States with the George Floyd killings, that several of the police departments as a group expressed solidarity with the demonstrators by what they call taking a knee, by kneeling down and recognizing that a wrong was committed and that something should happen. And the demonstrators didn't seize that moment of solidarity. They still tried to drive wedges between themselves and the police departments, which I think was an amazing missed opportunity. And it's a misunderstanding of what needs to happen and how that needed to happen. So again, people on the streets day and night, young and old, all of them together, and all of these actions building the strength of the society. So as people were out there with their children, the society itself gets stronger. What we've been doing here, the society gets weaker as people are looking on their televisions and saying, this isn't what I don't know what they're doing. I don't know if I agree with it, or these particular actions, especially the violent actions, we don't agree with. So let's go through quickly the 10 elements of what I call the people power revolutions. And I'm going to look at this from the point of view of what are the 10 elements? What's the opposite of the 10 of these elements? And what's happening right now on our streets, right now in cities like the one I'm in, like Portland, Oregon. So with people power revolutions, there's a massive outpouring of people. There's a broad spectrum of the public. There are too many people for the government to dominate or control or kill. And this includes the young and the old, the left and the right, and all classes. This was very classically done in the Velvet Revolution, where you had everyone from the right on like Thatcherite, right-wing folks, and you also had reformed communists and everybody in the middle, all of them signing Charter 77, all of them saying, we can do a better job governing ourselves than the Soviet Union can. Now, instead of having that broad spectrum of the public, and we do have examples of that. There have been several demonstrations here in Portland where some tens of thousands of people will come together. There's a very famous photo of people massed on the Burnside Bridge and covering it from end to end. And that demonstration was nonviolent, was not anger-driven, etc. Now, the opposite of the people powers revolution is angry demonstrations. And in the angry demonstrations, they're narrow self-interest groups. And those groups get angry, and those groups are easily isolated and easily controlled, which is why you don't want to be in a narrow interest group. In our recent upheavals, we are seeing these small organized groups doing the violence. They have little or no ideology, they have little or no agenda, they have little or no purpose other than to foment violence. And little or no possibility of success. In terms of number two, the people power revolutions are overwhelmingly nonviolent. There's no need for violence. I say that as a former, for myself, as a former violent revolutionary. If anybody needs the recipe for Molotov cocktails, I still know that. But I saw that would get us nowhere. And I changed, first of all, myself, and then we'll be getting to that in a bit, but also changed my perspective on how to, first of all, what the problem is, how to approach the problem, and then how to win. In terms of the angry demonstrations, There's actual violence and or the possibility of violence. They don't make a commitment to nonviolence, or there may be a nonviolent group, but the violent elements will latch onto that group, and the nonviolent group won't take the step of pushing away the violent element, of saying, you are not part of what we're trying to achieve. They don't make the distinction of saying, our goal, the part of our goal is being nonviolent, is advocating a nonviolent society. In the recent situations, we've got violence without a purpose. It's not angry. People aren't being angry. I'm not seeing, I know the feeling, and I've seen these kinds of demonstrations around the world where people are just so fed up, they're throwing bricks, they're throwing rocks, they're setting things on fire. This group that I'm seeing now is not venting that anger. Here in Portland, there's a statue of an elk in downtown, right in the downtown area. And people try to set fire to the elk statue. Now, maybe it was a Ku Klux Klan elk. Maybe the elk was a skinhead or something like that. The bottom line is there was no purpose to it other than I want to see something burn. And while I didn't have any love for this particular elk, whenever I drove down the street, the elk was facing the wrong way on a one-way street. And I called the street Elk Butt Street when we got to that point, because all you're looking at is the butt of an elk. But while I had no particular love for the elk, I didn't have any hate for it either. Like, why destroy? Why destroy for the purpose of destroying? All that does is completely rob your movement of legitimacy. Okay, and I'm going too slow here, so I'm going to go a little bit faster. So number 3, there's a conscious element, conscious effort to connect to the other, to connect to the police, to connect with the politicians, to connect with whoever your other is, to get support from them. In the angry demonstrations, there's blaming and attacking the other. And in our recent situation, I'm not even clear who the other is. Is it bad police? Is that the other? Is it all police? Is it white people? Is it politicians? Because you haven't defined the other, there are these different and conflicting objectives regarding the other. And we're holding people in our past and in our present to a standard of ideological purity that simply doesn't exist. I'm calling that anarchist absolutism. If you've ever made a mistake anytime in your past, if you've ever changed your opinion or perspective of things, then you're wrong, you're bad, and we're going to attack you for something that happened 30 years ago. We're going to attack you for operating from the height of your consciousness 30 years ago. We're not going to give you any credit for actually having changed your consciousness over that time. Again, I think that that's a recipe for disaster. Number 4, there's purposeful action in the people power revolution, but it's not led by anyone. Actions are spontaneous. The leaders come up out of the organization, out of the activities themselves. No one starts the actions. No one stops the actions. When you're dealing with positive, nonviolent actions, these things will arise. The angry demonstrations are mob activity. You know, somebody's going to burn something down. Somebody's going to throw one of those Molotov cocktails I know how to make. Someone's going to rob a store. It's mob activity. In our recent situations, we've got small groups of highly organized street fighters. as I said, I've looked out my own window and watched them in operation. They're really organized, and I will give them points on how to take an action, but taking an action without any ideology, without any agenda, or without any goals, and not even trying to get anybody's support. So again, taking the action to take the action. Number 5, short, focused, positive, powerful agendas and goals. And once the goal is achieved, everybody goes home. You declare victory and go home. When you go home that way, you feel good. We achieved something. You feel like you are part of the society, not apart from the society. In the angry demonstrations, there aren't any goals. They're just angry outbursts. The violent element has a goal, and that is to provoke a violent response by the government. The leaders have a goal, and the leader's goal is to try to control or try to take credit for the activity of the people that are out on the street. In our recent days, there are hidden goals. Those folks that I saw organized, the kind of the organized attacks on the Lloyd Center, they were goal driven. I just have no idea what their goals are, okay? The goals seem to be violence itself, and they don't seem to have an end to what they're doing. Number 6, there's a triggering event that mobilizes people for positive change. The triggering event may be negative, the way that the George Floyd killing was amazingly negative and visible to so many tens of millions of people around the world. But the outcome of that can be positive change. In the angry demonstrations, though, the triggering event provokes anger, and we've seen lots and lots of that anger playing itself out on the streets. And in the recent demonstrations, the demonstrators are not in sync with the energy that's been released. The people, again, some of the people I've been seeing here in Portland and other places, they're not really triggered by the Floyd killing. They are triggered by the opportunity to be violent toward the police. In the people power revolutions, the actions are targeted to the center of power. The actions are very simple, yet they're very symbolic of a new vision. They're not targeted to the police. They're targeted to the people who are behind the police. In the angry demonstrations, there's random and meaningless acts whenever anger builds up. Innocent people and neutral people are hurt, and the powerful people are largely unaffected by that. In the recent events, there seems to be violence for violence sake. If there's an agenda or a purpose, I haven't seen it. The fighting with the police seems to be in order to fight with the police. Now, I'm very aware that there are the calls for defunding the police, which again, I think is a mistake. There's a calls for disbanding the police, which is a much bigger mistake. But that doesn't seem to be the reason why you burn the statue of the elk. So this is a wrinkle on the angry demonstrations and not a positive development at all. Number 8, people are aware that they're making history, that they're doing the impossible. You can see it on their faces. You can see that people have come out to take down the Berlin Wall. People who came out during the Velvet Revolution or the Cedar Revolution or the Orange Revolution, they are aware that they're doing something that's never been done before. In the angry demonstrations, there's expressions of frustration with the current situation. There's anger about the current situation, but there's no vision. There's no thought about the future. And because of that, people who are in the elites on all sides try to manipulate the actions for their own benefit. In the recent situations, the violence is not really angry. It doesn't seem to be directed by the world events. The organized violence that I've been seeing has very little or no Black participation in it. It's not because of George Floyd. Again, it's because of the opportunity that's presented. In terms of the people power revolution, there's very potent symbolism. There's flags, there's slogans, there's chants. The people are demonstrating that the national symbols belong to the people. They don't belong to the government. In angry demonstrations, there are either a lack of symbols or they're negative, divisive, and anger-producing symbols, where the slogans are "down with X" or "stop doing X," as opposed to saying, "What is this highest vision that we are being called to achieve?" And in our recent situations, there's calls for action, there's empty posturing, and there's posturing that is lacking reality. Defunding or disbanding the police, the goal, as stated, is something I'm against. Now, I am very for positive transformation. That's not part of it. I am in favor of transforming the police. And I think that's a goal that not only is positive, I think it's achievable. So from the very beginning, by stating a goal that is so negative, people that you would want on your side, people like me, aren't on your side. And so, and by stating a goal that's impossible to implement, what you've done is set yourself up to try to achieve something that can't be achieved. And all that's going to do is perpetrate more angry demonstrations. So let's get to the last point. In the people power revolutions, there's deep passion. The movement is sustained by people's positive energy alone. The positive energy is the thing that in the Ukraine got people to come out in sub-zero temperature for 6 weeks, day and night. Okay, that is a statement in and of itself of how powerful this moment can be. But if you dissolve the moment into angry demonstrations, that anger, because it's anger, because anger is not sustainable, you can't keep anger going for 5 or 10 or 30 years or whatever. The demonstrations disappear when the anger goes away. Or people try to bring the anger back up and turn it into more demonstrations, which is a losing proposition. And in our recent situations, somebody is organizing it. There is some entity or person that's behind it that's maintaining the level of the current demonstrations. We don't see who that is, and therefore I'm highly suspicious of any movement that's hiding its leadership, that's hiding its agenda, that's hiding its goals. For all I know, all of this could be just a tool of the White House that's trying to create problems on the street that they're going to come in and solve. Okay, no, I'm not paranoid. The reality is that regardless who is behind it, they need to come forward, and we need to see what kind of character they have. We need to see what are their goals. We need to be able to test those goals in the reality of our being. And anybody who doesn't want to do that is not fit to be a leader of this societal transformation. Okay, so these are what the winners look like. These are the people who were on the streets and recognize in a positive way that their energy can bring about a positive result. And this is a quote from Victor Hugo that you've heard me say a number of times. Greater than the tread of many armies is an idea whose time has come. So, what won't work to transform society? What if you try to do it this way, it's not going to work. To take no action, just to be sitting there watching your TV, guess what? You won't be part of the transformation of the society. Violent action does not transform the society. Action without a vision, without holding a high superior vision, doesn't make transformation. Action without values, and that's why I'm saying, if you ask me my values, I tell you. Actually, I tell you without you even asking me, because I think that you have to have a value-driven revolution. Action without inclusivity, without recognizing that all of us need to be included in this. Action that's based on failed or outmoded theories. A lot of you know how disparaging I am of the dead white guy's theories, okay? To go back 100 years, 200 years, 300 years, 500 years, and try to base what you're doing right now on the theories of the past. Actions that generate their own backlash, the antibody effect. You can't do the kinds of things like tearing down statues and things like that without a group of people being against it, and unless you make a conscious effort to incorporate their energy into what you're doing, you're creating the antibodies of your own movement. Taking actions that strengthen the status quo, and taking disconnected piecemeal actions where this part doesn't relate to that part, and that part doesn't relate to the other part. So let's talk about what are the steps that actually lead to a positive revolution. First of all, it has to be a nonviolent and positive vision. It has to be a vision that we, the people, can get behind. It has to have inclusivity as its primary value, that we are creating a world that works for all, not creating a world that works for all my friends or for those people over there. It has to be a global revolution. The problem isn't America. No, we're a big part of the problem, but the problem just isn't located here. It's located everywhere, and everywhere has to be where we have to look for this. It has to be a revolution of the spirit. And again, for those of you who know me, you know what I'm talking about. For those of you who don't know me, let me say really quickly, by spirit, I am not talking about religion. I am not talking about any particular religious belief or practice. I'm recognizing that all of us hold a part of that spirit, and that spirit is what wants to come up in the world right now. A revolution in compassion. And when you look at the pictures of the burning buildings, the angry mobs, etc., compassion isn't in those pictures. What we need to be doing is recognize that when we have compassion for George Floyd and the George Floyds of our world, we have compassion for a particular community of people that have been oppressed, when we have compassion for ourselves, that we deserve a better society than the one we've got right now. When we do all of that, it then permeates itself throughout the society, and we become a society of compassion as opposed to a society of separation, where we have no enemies, where the victim and the villain are one. And that's something that I think is really lacking in our conversations right now. This is something that Václav Havel said in one of his writings. He said, the line between the victim and the victimizer runs right through my heart. The line between the victim and the villain lies through each of our hearts. If I can look at myself as the victim of society, but I can also look at myself as the recipient of the society, as the beneficiary of the society. And because I can hold these two pictures in mind, paradoxically, I can start working with other people who may be more on the victim side or more on the villain side, and bring them to a new and deeper understanding of what they're doing, how they're affected by it, etc. We need new political and economic systems and structures. We don't need to be reforming the police. We need to be transforming the police. There was a statement that was put out early in the George Floyd situation that the goal of one of our oldest and best known Black organizations stated that their goal was to end chokeholds and knee holds by the police. And that is such a tiny, it's not even a goal, it's not even a reform. That's not thinking through the magnitude of the problem and therefore the magnitude of the response. What we need is a vision of a new humanity in the 21st century, not what we've had, but what we need to have. What are the kinds of things that are possible right now? What are the possibilities for our humanity right now? That's the level of thinking that we need. We know we're not going to get that from the Democrats. We know we're not going to get it from the Republicans. We know we're not going to get it from anybody's extremists. It's got to come from you. It's got to come from me. And we're the ones that have to articulate this. We have to know that what we're doing is impossible, and we all then therefore have to do it. We have to make doing the impossible our mantra. Tearing down the Berlin Wall was impossible until it was done, and then it was inevitable. And that's the kind of thinking that we need here. This is from someone who sent me an email a couple of weeks ago. And he said, what I heard while I listened to your George Floyd video was the reaffirmation that we can't reach up to change the systemic apex of the pyramid unless we have an inclusive, broad-based spiritual foundation and a shared awareness of our humanity. And he followed that up with, I'm listening. And that's what we all have to do. And the place that we start doing that listening is in our hearts. The place where I have to be listening is, what is my heart directing me to do? What is our collective heart, our societal heart, saying that we need to do? I can take all of my energy and I can point it at Donald Trump, which means I could take all of my energy and I can waste my time because he won't change. Instead, what I can do is take my energy and say, what is the society that wants to be born right now? what are the elements of the society that wants to and needs to be born right now? How do I reach to the deepest level of my own spirituality, my own consciousness, my own psychology? How do I tap into the part of me that wants to come alive right now? And how do I carry that forward into creating a whole new world? And I'm going to end this with a quote from Nelson Mandela. He said, "It always seems impossible until it's done." That's the thing that we need to be focused on right now. And that's the thing that we as a society can and should be focused on. That's the thing that we as a group can literally seize this moment and can operate in such a way that that we become the people that form the basis of a new society. So the first, I'll tell you a quick story, and then I'm going to, I got done a little bit early, so I'm just going to open up to questions and comments in a bit. But I'll tell you a quick story of when I was first supposed to meet Václav Havel. This was about 3 weeks after the Velvet Revolution, and we had been in communication, so I sent him a note saying, I'm coming to Prague because I want to see what a revolution looks like. And he agreed to a meeting that I thought was just going to be a photo op. But when I got there, his brand new government was in crisis. And the crisis was that they had found out that for decades, the Soviet Union had subsidized the price of wheat, which means subsidizing the price of bread. And when they defeated the Soviet Union says, okay, fine, we're not subsidizing you anymore. And so the price of bread was going to rise like 2 or 3 times overnight. And they were expecting that there would be rioting in the streets because the price of bread had gone up. So what do you do when there's rioting in your streets? From your actions, do you call out your own militia and have them put people down? Do you continue the subsidies knowing you have absolutely no money in your treasury? They had no money to deal with, to work with. And so I sat outside the door where they're making the decision as to what to do. And everybody on the other side of that door, none of them had been in the government before. That's like taking the 24 people on this call right now and making you the government, okay? And saying, okay, what do you do? And I recognized at that point, they're not ready. But we, here in the United States, I said, we've got a head start on that. We know this problem is coming up. We can do the kind of work to get ready for it. And so from that time, from sitting outside that door with Havel sending people out saying, sorry, I can't meet with you yet. Sorry, I can't meet with you yet. And I realized, you need to do your thing. I'll come back some other time. I recognize that we had years before we had to face that issue ourselves. So guess what? For those years, we didn't do anything. And now we're facing the issue of what do we do to create an economy from the shambles of the old one? What do we do to create a political system from the shambles of the old one? And those are the things that I think that all of us need to be focused on all of us need to be learning about, and all of us need to be conscious of. So thank you for listening, and thank you for your time and your effort and your interest in creating a new society. So I'm going to continue the recording. For those of you who need to hang up at the top of the hour, this is your time to get off the line. For those of you who can hang in here for another 20 or 30 minutes or so, I'm going to take some calls, some questions. What I would suggest everyone to do right now is turn on your video, not your audio. We'll keep the audio clean here. And we are going to have, turn on your video if you want to. I'm not forcing you to. As usual, I'm going to invite people to put your hand up if you want to get called on. And that means that there's a button down the bottom that says participants. And if you hit that button and it says raise your digital hand, and a little blue hand will pop up that I can see. Or if you don't want to deal with any of that, you can wave your meat hand around, and I'll see you waving your meat hand, okay? So right now, this is my filler voice as I'm waiting to see if anyone is going to raise digital hands. Brian, you have raised your hand, so I'm going to invite you to unmute yourself and find out what is happening with you.
Good evening, Shay. And hello, everyone. It's well, and just for the sake of the group, I'll just jump right into my question.
Okay.
Of all the factors right now that seem to be constraining forward progress and the types of conversations that need to be had, and I'll target toward, let's say, in the U.S. right now, what do you see as the most immediate constraint? I mean, there are several factors at play. All of them are important, but what, in your opinion, what's the one where the bottleneck is the tightest, where we're not going to go anywhere until we start having those conversations? What are those?
I think the biggest issue that we've got right now is our media. The media is fanning flames that I've had people from around the country contacting me, believing that Portland was on fire, that the entire city was ablaze, and that there's helicopter gunships everywhere, that this is Armageddon here, and it's not. Okay, now it's not pleasant. This is not the Portland that I moved to 33 years ago, but the media's ability to twist a story away from what we should be thinking about and toward what we should be dealing with, I think is really massive. I think following that, I should say, right along with that, is the notion of misunderstanding both the rhetoric and the solutions coming out of our unfortunate situations here. And what I mean by that is, everyone, if you haven't seen Common Way's George Floyd video, I put a link, or maybe I didn't put that link. Hang on. I'm putting a link to a bunch of videos in the chat box right now. And one of them is the George Floyd video. And da, 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 and there they all are. Okay. And I recommend you watch all of them. Okay. So not right now though. In there, I propose some definite steps that can be taken for the transformation of the police department from this militarized group of people that are divorced from the everyday reality of communities to something that is more more in keeping with what communities need. Now, as soon as you get into this notion of defunding the police or disbanding the police, you have all these people start asking questions like, what does that mean? I don't even know what it means. Or does that mean that you take, $20,000 or $30,000 out of the police budget and say, okay, we're going to give that to the Boys and Girls Club over here. And now we've defunded the police. Look, we've taken some money away from them. So we wind up with confused and confusing situations from that. And so it's not, so to me, having a common agenda, having a positive agenda, having a nonviolent agenda is one of the most important things that we can do right now. Getting away from the media. The media will just continue going blah, blah, blah forever. You don't have to listen to them. And I, for one, don't. And it's really amazing. There are these off switches. I mean, it's located like right down here. You just push the button and boom, it goes off, and you are able to do anything you want to do after that with your time. Okay. For those of you who don't know me, I advocate for going on a news diet. And part of the news diet is stop watching broadcast news, stop watching the talking head, get your news off of the internet and only look at the headlines and ask yourself a question. Do I need to know this? So the headlines will say, Donald Trump says something ridiculous today. Okay, do I need to actually know what that is? No, I'm going to go on to the next item, and you'd be really surprised at how little you need to actually absorb of that. The other thing I deeply advocate is not just for the news, but for all social media too. Before you click on the app, set a timer. And you set the timer for whatever you want it to. If you want to spend 3 hours on it, then spend 3 hours on it. But I would suggest you don't spend more than 20 minutes on it. That in 20 minutes, you can find out what's happening in the world. And when the timer goes off, you shut it off and you do something else, like maybe interact with another human being. I can go on about that, and maybe at some point in time, we should do a webinar just on how to interface with your digital reality, but that won't be for this right now. I would like to see another hand or two up, and if I don't see that, I see yours, Lisa. But if I don't see some hands, we'll just wrap up early. This is bonus time here. So Lisa first, and then John.
So I think it's really interesting because I teach at universities, and what I'm seeing is they don't watch the news. I'll say the college age students, rather they follow individuals that they follow on Instagram, some Twitter, mostly not. So I think you have a real split in terms of how we're taking information in. I think the older generations are still listening to mainstream media, news commentaries, maybe late night comedians. And then I think the younger generation, it's very split. They're following. And if you think about, I have mixed emotions on this. I'm not saying we had a newspaper, we had full news reporting, but you got a mixture of what was presented to you. Now we so selectively choose the opinions of those we value. So we only get fed more and more of what we want to hear versus hearing opposing opinions.
Mm-hmm.
So it just, you know, and I think that's interesting because I think in a sense it makes them feel, and I say them, I'm not sure who them is, the public, depending on where you are, either feeling more empowered if they're in agreement with the statements, or less empowered or powerless if they feel like they're fighting an uphill battle, not in agreement.
Number one, yes. And these, so you said, I think, 2 or 3 things, and that's yes, yes, yes. This is a very disturbing trend, and it's a very disturbing, I think we've created something that we don't know. It's like creating a car. Don't build a steering wheel into it, put people in it and have them drive around and see what happens, okay? One of the things that, so you're absolutely right there in terms of this following of individuals, which means your worldview gets shrunk to this. So a lot of the people who have been contacting me saying, oh my God, Portland's on fire, do you need to leave there and come to a safe haven like New York City? Those folks are following a particular feed and getting their news from that feed. And, but the thing that you're saying in terms of newspapers, well, I should say that the traditional media, is that they gave you a generalized look at the world from a particular perspective. Now that perspective was largely white, largely middle class and above, largely having a particular world focus or world point of view.
It would depend on the newspaper you're looking at, because every editor of every newspaper has a bias. So you always, you know, look at the bias of the writer, so to speak.
Yes and no, so yes, a bias, but a bias within a certain level of perspective. Okay, and I'm giving from my point of view.
Okay.
Growing up, we had, you know, the Philadelphia. There's 2 newspapers in Philadelphia at the time. Philadelphia Inquirer, and then there's an evening paper, but there's also an African American media, Jet Magazine, Ebony Magazine, several in a town like Philadelphia, 2 or 3 Black newspapers, and they gave you news that would never show up in the white newspaper, and some of that news would save your life. And so now I can follow this one narrow aspect, and that's the whole thing. And I think that we're getting painted into a corner, and I'm painting myself into a corner by talking too much. So thank you for that. And I'm going to call on John next, and then on Helena directly after that.
Yeah, thanks for this, Sharif. And everybody for being here. I may be repeating Brian's question, but I'm curious, what is the wheat subsidy equivalent or equivalents? There may be many that are being subsidized that we are not aware of, and that it's going to bite us really hard when it gets taken away.
Oh, goodness. I'll give you a really quick answer to that. More than we can even imagine. And when we get to that point, things are going to get really ugly really quick. Remember, all the folks in Prague that were in the castle didn't see the wheat subsidy happening. The mechanisms of our government, the real things that they do, are hidden from us. You know, they're hidden behind layers and layers of obfuscation. I think I said that right. Like, for example, we've done the $1,200 stimulus checks. We've done a whole bunch of other stimulus things. We've done stimulating the already stimulated corporations, etc. And nobody's asking where that money came from, you know? And I know a bit about where the money comes from. You know, there's a really, really big printing press, and they just kind of, okay, bring more paper in, and they just start running off more, okay? That catches up with you. When it catches up with you, it's going to be amazingly ugly. Or it can be one of those moments where you say, okay, we've got to come together and we've got to do things differently. This is where my world experience comes in. I was in Argentina when the bottom of their economy fell out, where the money was worth about the same as my Post-it notes here, okay? And what do? You do the best you can. And in Argentina, most people came together to figure it out, as opposed to separating from each other and then trying to figure it out. If you remember that chart I showed you in the beginning of the 12 global challenges, I can't tell you which one of those challenges will blow up first. I can't tell you what order they're going to blow up in. In order to do this, in order for us to get through 2020 has been a hell of a year already, and it's only been 6 months. For us to get through the rest of 2020, we're going to have an attitude of resiliency. We've got to be prepared for anything to happen. And we've got to be prepared to be the leaders of everything happening. Back to Prague for 1 second, and then I'll get to Helena. In the castle at that time, the seat of government was the castle, and so and their call was Havel to the castle. When Havel gets to the castle, he's going to solve everything. When they got to the castle, every hour on the hour, they would have laugh breaks. They would stop everything and start laughing. What they were laughing at is, we're the government. It's like we can't believe, like, we are supposed to be the government now. We're used to protesting the government. A lot of the people in our society that are used to the slogan, fight the power, when they have power, they're going to fight each other. What we have to learn is how to be the power. How do we exercise power? How do we make compromises? The anarchist absolutists don't believe in compromise. It should be, there's only one way to do it, and if you don't do it our way, you're a failure. And we should be opposing you. We want you out of office, you know. There were calls for the mayor of Portland to resign. And my question was, and who are you going to put in there? I have no love for this guy, but he's, you know, if you think you're going to do a better job, then you should run for the office, as opposed to saying, he didn't tie his tie the right way today, so we're going to oppose him. Okay, I'm going, Helena, how are you? And thank you for hanging in there. Let me put your blue hand down here. So, so what's up?
Well, it's what I put in the chat, and what hit me from your presentation were all these revolutions were millions of people all gathering for days and days and days. And so is that what you're saying we need? And how do we do that in a country our size? Or is it something that can be done at a state level? And how do we get the leadership and the unity? It's a lot of questions. But.
Yeah, let me answer all of them by just saying 42. No, the I'm not sure how it happens here. I don't think it will start happening on a federal level and then go to a state level and then go to a local level. I think it will happen the other way. I think when we start articulating common goals, we can start the process of that coming together. And that coming together has to come together over the present divisions that we've got. I'll give you an example of what I mean. Right now, there's supposed to be these insurmountable barriers between left and right. Okay, left and right. Insurmountable barriers between whites and blacks. Insurmountable barriers between blacks and the police. And from actually talking to people, I recognize that all of those so-called barriers are actually boundaries, and those boundaries are permeable. We can articulate common goals that will bring whites and blacks together. We can articulate common goals that will bring different classes of people together. We can articulate common goals that will not have this group or that group as being our opposing entities. When I work with right-wing white men who are exhibiting racist behavior and get their behavior to change, I therefore know that all of this is possible. This is not an impossible task. If I take the task that's given to me by the media, then everything is impossible. The media feeds on that separation. Our present political leaders feed on that separation. What we have to do is be willing to take a step beyond that, those schisms, and take a step at a point where we are uncomfortable, but we also recognize that there's a way to that we will all come together behind this. If I insist on ideological purity from the people I'm working with, I'll never get it. We'll never get anywhere, and we're going to divide up into our different balkanized states and then start fighting each other. If I start recognizing that we can have a common vision, an uber vision, and recognize we're all different in how we achieve that, then we can do things a lot differently. Let me say one more thing about that, and I'm not seeing any other hands here, so we may be in our wind up phase here. Let me say one more thing about it. And this happened just recently. There's a group, I think it was the American Bar Association and a couple of other groups, had invited F.W. de Klerk to be a speaker here in the States. So they were going to bring him over. And one of the so-called progressive radical groups started protesting that de Klerk was coming, and got to the point where he said, you know, if you don't want me there, I'm not going to come. And so he doesn't come. And they declare victory. We kept this racist out of our country, out of our pure country here. Now, F.W. de Klerk was the perfect partner to Nelson Mandela. You couldn't get a better partner than F.W. de Klerk. Someone who was unashamedly Afrikaner. Someone who was unashamedly South African. He calls himself an African. His people were born in Africa for generations. He said he recognized that the white minority government did some wrong things, but that doesn't make him as an Afrikaner a bad person. It doesn't make Afrikaners bad people. So he was able, as an Afrikaner, to join hands with this Black South African and create a multiracial society. Now, what the purists, what the anarchist absolutists want is for him to get out a big whip and start beating himself saying, I'm sorry I'm an Afrikaner, I'm sorry I'm an Afrikaner. And that is wrong on so many different levels. I don't even know how to respond to it. And what I've been, and I've said this to a few people on this call, and I'll say to all of you now, what we need to be searching for is the white people in our society who can be proudly and unabashedly white and still recognize white people have done some really wrong things. And I don't know any group on this planet that hasn't done really wrong things. And if you want to hold one of them up for me, I'll start articulating some of the wrong things that they've done. Okay. What we need is someone who can lead whites, especially white men, into a whole new partnership without getting the whip out and saying, oh, we're bad, white men are evil, etc. And I've yet to find them. But I think it's something that we will have to look for, and something that we're going to have to open ourselves to. That what we need in all of our communities, and that includes our wealthy communities, our poor communities, etc. We need partnerships that are going to come together and be markers of the new society that we're trying to get to. I don't know if that answers your question. We're going to go to Debbie now. Debbie, you're right there. And yes, Helena, I'm going to ask you to mute yourself again, please.
So I'm going to ask a question, but I want to draw attention to the fact that there are some questions in the chat box. Whether you get to them tonight, whether you get to them tonight. But my question for you is...
No, sorry, let me, before you ask the question, if somebody can dig through and you can find a question or two from the chat box that sounds interesting enough for you to ask it, okay. I can't get into the chat box because in order to do that, I'd have to put my glasses on. And I will, but I'll let you say if there's a question or two there that are calling out to you, that would be good. So Debbie, go ahead.
So my question is, can you think of a situation in US history that approximates an attempt at the type of revolution that you're suggesting that we need to accomplish?
Yeah, the easy answer to that is Martin Luther King and the civil rights era. Absolutely crystal clear goal. We need civil rights for all people, and we need and those civil rights are very specific. We need voting rights. We need rights of assembly, et cetera, et cetera. This is his movement was absolutely nonviolent. In order for you to be part of his movement, before you would go to a demonstration, you had to sign a pledge that no matter what happens, you will remain nonviolent. And this is what nonviolence means. You had to agree to dress up in your Sunday finest. Okay, so when you see the pictures of the police dogs attacking the demonstrators in Birmingham, and you see that people, they're not dressed in, well, the way the demonstrators here in the States right now are dressed. They were dressed in their suits and ties and their Sunday finest as the dogs were being sicked on them. And that helps to create the image in people's minds that this is, what's wrong with this? What's wrong with going to the lunch counter and buying a hamburger and fries and a Coca-Cola? Why should the state stop from doing this? So I would point out to you, for all of us, Dr. King and his example and his movement up until the Civil Rights Acts were being signed in 65 and 66. After that, he lost his thread. Well, I should say he was trying to find this larger thread. This is what I started this recording with. That as big as racism is, and this is, like I said, I could give you my own personal examples for the next half hour of how big this problem is. As big as the problem is, it's not the biggest problem. So what King found out was, once the civil rights bills were passed, a lot of things changed and a lot of things did not change at all. And then he was trying to find that thread, and he saw that it wound through the Vietnam War. He saw that it wound through our economic system. He saw that it was winding all sorts of ways. And because he saw that it was winding all these ways, he got himself assassinated. And our work, I believe, has to start at that furthest end. And I am advocating that now. And my health insurance policy to keep somebody from shooting through this window right here is that you're going to be working with that with me, okay? That it's not a one-person deal where we take this one person out of the equation by either killing him off or buying him off, okay? Once you get to that point, we can start doing things a very different way. Okay, I don't know if anybody has gone into the chat box and pulled out a question or so. If not, we are going to be in, I'm gonna end with, I used to quote this exhaustively until I wrote Creating a World That Works for All. It's like, okay, this becomes the stepchild. But I really like this book, and I want to read. I started off reading from the introduction. I'm going to wind this up by reading from the conclusion. Where I say, new times and new issues call for a new direction. A few brave souls may venture a protest. There's nothing I can do about the Middle East, or pollution, or why the price of everything is so high. I'm just one person. What power does one person have to change the world? The answer is easy: the power of compassion. When military might has rusted, when temporal fame has vanished, when all worldly powers have come to an end, the true power of compassion can be felt. Great cities turn to dust. Beauty fades. The strong become weak and feeble, but the compassionate truly will inherit the earth. What power can the compassionate do to correct what can the compassionate do to correct our modern day problems? Everything. Compassion is the light which drives out the darkness. Fear, egotism, and arrogance causes us to ignore the pain and suffering of others. Learning compassion, that ultimately I am you, will provide the energy for the profound societal shift necessary for our salvation. So on that note, I wish us all well. I hope that I'll see some of you in a week time where we go through this again. Some of you I'll see in our series on Solutions Beyond Diversity and on Paths of Awakening. On all of that, I wish us all well. So good night, and I will see you at another point in time. Bye.